I believe, and it's not just a belief, there's research to back it up, that a parent that has meaningful conversations with their children, that is the most powerful protective factor in that child's life.
Oh, yeah.
And why are we separating parents from children? And even at adolescent age, the whole paradigm for healthcare and for other adolescent services are to separate parent and child without a thread of evidence that that is a healthy way to pursue. So in Proto, we are bringing children and parents together, both in the clinical setting, in the educational setting, in every setting possible.
Hi, Valerie.
Hello.
Valerie Huber. Yes. Valerie's name came up on my phone just about a week ago. Like, it really wasn't very long ago. And I reached out and said, we met in Washington a while ago, and I kind of dropped the ball, and now it's come to my attention that we're going to be in Washington, and maybe we could have an in-person podcast. So here we are together by divine providence, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was a fun reconnection that took me by surprise as well, but I'm glad that it came together.
Yeah, me too. So let's just get right in there. Could you share with my listeners your journey and inspiration behind founding the Institute for Women's Health?
Well, I will tell you that it was not my intention to begin an NGO. I've begun a couple in the past, and I know that there are great opportunities with a nonprofit organization, but it's difficult. You know, you have to always be fundraising. You always have the opportunity to be nimble, but there are both opportunities and challenges with an NGO.
Yeah,
but
fundraising isn't, some people can do it and some people can't.
Well, you know, when you're the president of an NGO, you have to be the fundraiser, even though that's not in your DNA.
Right.
But, you know, if you really believe in the mission, you can share the vision and the mission, and it just takes the authenticity of why we're doing what we're doing. We realized that there was a narrative about women's health that had kind of been overtaken by ideologies, and we thought we need to change this narrative. Women's health has to be about women's health, nothing more, nothing less. And when we were looking for another women's health policy organization in the U.S. that we might be able to partner with or whatever, we couldn't find one. So we thought, well, we've got to start it. And it really was precipitated in large part when I was U.S. Special Representative for Global Women's Health. And I saw that this problem was not just here in the United States, but it was around the world, where literally women were dying from totally preventable causes, but not receiving the health care that they needed to survive because other things were getting in the way, and things that ought not be there. So we just believed that we needed to begin an organization to be in that space where others were not.
So how do you define women's health?
Well, women's health, we define it from an optimal health standpoint. So when someone talks about health, typically they're talking about physical health. But when you look at the literature, health encompasses much more than physical health. Yes, it does include that, but it also includes mental health and social and psychological, relational health, and spiritual health. And when you see those aspects of health come together, that's when you can really talk about healthy thriving. not just the absence of disease.
Right. And so I wonder when did psychological health become a part of our healthcare? Because I'm sure at the beginning it was physical health mostly. It was broken legs and bleeding and, that they were dealing with. But eventually you had to realize that some people were scared to go to the doctor, I guess. And so then psychological health must have come on board. But spiritual health, is that a new designation, do you think, to our healthcare system, possibly?
Well, unfortunately, not all aspects of health, or what we call optimal health, are an integrated part of our healthcare system. I would say that, especially since the COVID pandemic, mental health has really elevated in terms of recognizing not only the need to include that, but also the interaction and interrelationship between mental health and physical health. We had kind of a global experiment on that, and we could see during COVID. Spiritual health, there's a lot of evidence about the importance of spiritual health, both to mental health and physical health and purpose and just a whole lot of aspects of a person's life. But it's not widely a part of the narrative and conversation.
Yeah, isn't that strange? Because I really think that everything that happens to me every day, God sends me challenges. He sends me messages about whether I'm on the right track or not. And so health, a person's health can be an indication that they're on the right track or not spiritually. So it is kind of interesting that it hasn't been a part, that it was something that was separate.
There were a couple of analysis of the research regarding spiritual health not long ago. And there were about 1,000 different studies showing the importance. And we're not talking merely about Christianity,
right,
but it's religiosity and what that means not only to purpose for life, but social interaction and the speed at recovery after illness or surgery. It's just amazing. Recently, I shared this with religious leaders in Latin America, and one of the religious leaders came up to me and said, I had no idea the breadth of opportunity we have as religious leaders to those who we spend time with, whether in our church, synagogue, or mosque. And the interrelationship not only to personal health, but also to familial health. And it kind of broadened their sense of purpose when they are talking to those who are in their religious group and who look to them for advice and guidance.
You know, when I was in the hospital, I went to the hospital chapel, that was there. But it was just a quiet place, really, to go. It was a quiet place to go. And it was good. And I had palliative care nurses come and doctors come to visit me when things were really at a low point. But the religious help that I received was from outside the hospital, of friends coming in, rather than those religious people in the hospital coming around. And so maybe this will embolden them to be more of a presence. And I think that would be awesome, really. I think it would be awesome.
I do too, and I hope that we have a broader conversation when we're talking about health, not just when we're talking on a podcast, but that it becomes an integral part of healthcare delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And it also moves not only preventive but healing opportunities far beyond the clinic.
Yeah, because I just did a podcast with a woman who was in a very stressful situation for quite a long period of time, and she had a rosary with her. But at the beginning, because she was stuck in this place of a little sanctuary within a lot of trouble, she was feeling animosity towards the people that were holding her there. They didn't know she was there, but she was stuck there, and she was just ruminating about revenge, right? And she'd feel her body get all upset and tight, and your stomach, your digestive system wouldn't be working at that point either, so it'd be difficult to eat. And then she started realizing over time that when she was praying the rosary, her body would become peaceful. But when she was thinking about these things and revenge-type thoughts, everything would tighten up again. And she started realizing, I have to spend more time in prayer and less time in distress because, I have to stay strong because I don't know how long I'm going to be stuck here.
Right.
And I also have to be present because I can't make any noise in case they hear me. So I have to be in pretty good shape. And so it was very interesting, if you are, and when you're in the hospital, it is distressful, not just for you, but for your family.
Right.
It's very distressful. And so that help, that spiritual help that you can have access to, can be really the difference between survival and not surviving, I think. It's...
Yeah. And I think that example that you just gave showed why we are really minimizing the opportunities out there for health when we don't bring all of these aspects in. One of the research studies showed the importance of prayer and or meditation because it does something not just mentally but physiologically as well. And you just
lowers your
described
blood pressure, sure, and these things allows you to listen. Allows you time to listen,
right?
And you might learn something rather than being so driven on control and trying to be. And it's no wonder, because who knows what kind of jeopardy your loved one is in, or you are in, and so you are looking for answers. But if you're so driven to find something, sometimes you can't see the large scope of things that are available to you. So, yes. So, yes, this is important work that you're doing. So, you've had quite a career. You've been in the Trump administration before this administration, and you held a designation to an ambassador at large. Can you recount some memorable experiences from this period?
Mm-hmm. So for the first 2 years of the administration, I worked on domestic issues related to adolescents and women's health. And I was approached in the third year that if I would move to the global side, they would like to begin a new position. And it was a special representative for global women's health. Initially, I thought, this doesn't seem like a good fit. I am not a diplomat. I have not worked internationally at all. I could count on one hand the number of countries I had visited up to that point.
What a departure.
Yes. But about 1 week into the job, it moved from a job to a missional pursuit because of what I saw. And some of the first conversations I had were with various leaders in developing countries. And I started hearing about the pressure that they were receiving, the threats, even to foreign assistance or publicly naming and shaming their countries if they refused to, under the guise of women's health, change foundational laws in their country. And one leader said, your country is also involved in this pressure, and named other countries in the global north, including in Europe and Canada, and I frankly, I was kind of shocked. I thought, this couldn't be happening. There has to be more to this story. And I thought, what is the context here? But then I talked to other countries, and I heard the same narrative, slightly different details, but the same thing over and over and over again. Well, part of my job was to help our negotiators in multilateral fora like the United Nations or at the World Health Assembly to advocate for the health of women and girls and families. And I saw what the negotiations looked like right there on the ground. And I'll never forget one where it was designed to improve health and thriving for women and girls. So it was the perfect resolution. And I saw how negotiations that it's, who can disagree that we need to put a focus on improving, especially in the developing world, but everywhere, frankly, health for those most vulnerable. And I thought, this certainly shouldn't be controversial, but it was. And most of the negotiation was around inserting things in that resolution where there wasn't an agreement among the nation states.
How would that happen?
Well, I'll give you one example. There was a coalition of countries, mostly, though not solely, from Europe, but certainly from the majority were global north countries, that proposed an amendment to a resolution or proposed that certain language be struck. And in each of these instances, it was an attempt to insert language then that could be used in an ideological manner. And the way that resolutions pass, like at the United Nations, for example, is that the member states get together and there is negotiation that takes place for days, sometimes long into the evening. Sometimes there's not even time for sleep. It can persist 3-4 in the morning, and then maybe 3 hours later, then you begin again for the next day.
Wow.
These resolutions don't pass unless they pass by consensus. And so usually the attempt to insert ideological tenets aren't explicit. And so there is language that is inserted that to a naive negotiator might think, well, that's fine.
Right.
But in truth, once that resolution is passed, we'll use the example at the United Nations, then a United Nations agency that has authority over that particular topic or subject matter will create a program where there is funding associated with it. They interpret those terms exactly how they were meant to be interpreted by those who inserted it, and then it becomes a cudgel. If a country wants funding for, we'll just keep the women's health topic, where if they want to be able to make some very real differences, there is a condition to that, and they have to keep the ideology as well. Well, that was a long explanation, but when I saw this taking place, I started meeting with countries who were inserting those ideological conditions and proposed that we work together. The United States provides foreign assistance for health. They provide foreign assistance for health. Up to 80%, some estimates have even more than 80% of health conditions for women are totally preventable. And in the developing world, we already know how to prevent them. In many cases, we know how to cure them. And if not curable, we know how to successfully treat them. But if they are preventable, let's work on prevention, right? So it's relatively easy to know what areas that we should focus on. And I propose that we focus on those areas where we already know the solutions and would make a huge change, not only in the lives of women and girls, but would prevent women and girls today from dying as a result.
Can you give me one example?
Yeah. Probably one of the easiest examples would be some of the causes for maternal mortality. One of them is hemorrhaging. In the United States and in Canada, if a woman goes into labor and she hemorrhages, there are blood supplies ready and things to prevent it from moving to a life-threatening situation. But let's think of a young woman who lives in a village in the developing world, and the closest clinic might be a day's walk.
Right.
And then once she gets there, there are no blood supplies. There's no sanitation. There are not necessary medicines to stop the contractions, with blood flow. There's not skilled attendants there. There's not electricity. I mean, all of those things
that we take for granted.
But can mean the difference between life and death for her. And none of those things on their own are expensive. They're not complicated. And so I propose to these countries, why don't we actually work together and make a difference? But the one condition is that we leave ideology off the table. We'll leave it off, you leave it off, and not a single country would agree.
Oh, is that right?
No.
Is that right? Well,
so you know what that told me? Women are being used. The topic of women's health is being co-opted for ideology. Because if a country that says we care about women, we care about their health, we care about fill in the blank, and yet they're unwilling to leave ideology off the table, that tells me there's something more important to them than women's health, and they're willing to sacrifice it. Well, on that basis, I knew that something needed to change. And that really is why we began talking to other countries about starting a coalition of nations that never had existed before.
Yeah. Good work. So let's see. So the Geneva Consensus Declaration. So let's talk about the concept behind that, and when it came about, and how useful it is for women's health.
I really think the Geneva Consensus Declaration can be a game changer.
Oh boy.
Here's why. What I saw as special representative were that nations who were co-opting women's health for ideology were organized. They had been for many years. They were strategic. They looked not at the short game, but the long game.
Why? I wonder why.
Decades.
Just decades.
Decades they had been working on this. And sometimes if you looked at a resolution, you would see only minuscule changes of terminology from year to year, because a number of these resolutions are a part of an annual negotiation process. And if
Very interesting. It's interesting because it's insidious, right?
It's very insidious. And the unsuspecting eye, or let's just say a new diplomat that's coming that doesn't have access to how language has changed maybe over the last decade, won't even see what's happening. And if you're looking at a small country with a small delegation that has to pick and choose which negotiations they even attend because of their small negotiating team, it's very easy for these things to fully be under the radar. Yet that coalition of countries that are strategizing together, that are planning which kind of terms they will all support, and they will have joint statements in support of that. It's very effective. We always know that working together, we do need one another.
Community, that's what it's all about.
But there had never been a coalition of nations that was similar to the Geneva Consensus Declaration. And it was with incredulity when I realized that there was no organized coalition that would agree to four principles, really. Number one, and they're all related. Number one, that wherever a country currently is, that they would commit to put a priority on improving health and thriving for women and girls. And we can talk about why that's important, but I'll just give the four. The second is that the family is foundational to every healthy society. Well, you don't have to look very far at the research to know that healthy women and girls thrive better when there are healthy families.
Yeah, and they are an integral part of the family.
Absolutely. Yes, it goes both ways.
Yes.
Third, there is no international right to abortion, but rather it's up to the country to decide. The reason that was included is because if new human rights are created, then that removes the ability of a country to legislate on that.
Right.
And abortion is very close to being declared a human right among those who are working in these realms. And then fourth, really is the context for those other three, and that is the sovereign right of countries to defend, promote, and improve those aforementioned
So this is really moving back from globalism back to the national, which is good, because if we don't have local control, there has to be local control. It's all about heaven and earth, and it can't just be the overarching principles and the overarching powers dictating. It has to be the people on the ground. Well, at every level, but it has to be the people on the ground who are making those decisions. So yes, I agree with that. That makes sense.
Yeah, and that is true. It's both a trickle up and a trickle down.
Yeah.
The reality is the target for the country is on the national government. They're the ones who are receiving the pressure. They're the ones who are receiving the threats.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are having foreign assistance either withheld or withdrawn if they don't agree to these threats.
Right.
And so we realized that this coalition needed to be nation to nation. But that's just the beginning. It's not the end. And that's why once we started the Institute for Women's Health, we saw it needed to go deeper than that. Right. But that coalition is so integral because both looking inside and the needs in country and to the population and the people who live there. If a nation is stymied, either because they are trying to protect their sovereign right to make these improvements without compromising sometimes even tenets in their own constitutions, it divides their attention and their time. And we always know the best way to win is to divert someone away from what they want to be and should be working on.
Right.
The other reality, though, are some of these countries have been standing for years trying to defend those core values. And it's a lonely fight. And they start looking around and they think they're alone. And they wonder, how long can we stand? We're just a small country. And these are big and influential pressures that are coming, not just from countries, but from foundations and from well-funded NGOs who have been stood up within our country for the express purpose just to cause mischief.
Right.
And there is some truth in that, a war of attrition. And countries were feeling it, and some of them had compromised. And they would, when I would talk to them, they would say, what do? We need the services for our people. We don't even negotiate about the ideology because we know we have no power, which is not true.
Right.
But that is what they feel like, and especially when they're alone. So as I tell countries, you have been standing alone for many years, but now you don't need to anymore.
Oh, that must come at a great relief. Huh?
I remember when I was in Geneva, right before the World Health Assembly, I met with a leader from an African country. And this is before the GCD, the Geneva Consensus Declaration, started. And he was one of the first leaders that we talked to. And I said, what would you think if we formed a coalition of nations around this? And he threw his hands up in the air and he said, that is the best news I have heard. And we have, in concert with the Secretariat now of the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which is the nation of Hungary, we have an annual commemoration of the signing of the GCD. Last year there were 40 countries there. And invited were not just those countries that were already members of the GCD, but those who should be members, but they may not know about it. And it was such an encouragement when members from those countries would come up to us and said, we didn't even know this coalition existed. We need to be a part. This is totally in line with our values, our priorities. And look at all these countries here that agree. So it truly is a huge encouragement internally, but also there is something to be said when there is a country of now, a coalition of now 36 countries representing every region of the world that can say, no, stop the ideology. And that's so much stronger than 36 individual countries doing it. But as a group, to negotiate, to learn from one another, in order to improve things in their country, but then also protect them from external influences that are nefarious.
Right. Very powerful external forces sometimes too, right? Yeah. So let's go back then to, you named 4 points.
Yes.
And the first point was women's health.
Yes.
Let's dig into women's health.
Oh, yes. Because that is the reason for the Geneva Consensus Declaration. Right. And when I told you that 1 week into my new job as special representative for global women's health for the U.S., it changed from a job to a passion.
Yeah.
It's because, when the onion is peeled and you see what is really at the core, it's motivating. Right. And it's no longer something that you just do because it's assigned to you.
So what was that moment? What did you see?
It was when I heard about this pressure and when I heard that women's health was being co-opted.
Yeah. So let's dig into women's health and describe what it is that's there and how it needs to change.
Well, first of all, can I provide a little bit of context?
Please do.
So when a country makes a commitment that wherever they are, they want to see health improve for women and girls, that's significant. But there are things that are disincentives, currently, disincentives for them to even care and then to make differences. And it's because of the global ranking of countries. So if you were to look at certain indicators for health, for women's health in a country, and let's just talk about the physical aspects.
Okay.
If you are number 195, you are always going to be at or near the bottom. You might change a little bit, but not significantly. And there will always be that negative narrative around how women and girls survive and live in your country. So we propose to countries a change in the narrative. And I say, I really think there's something both disingenuous and wrong about ranking countries, because then we can never applaud.
Well, we're still talking about groups of people.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And we need to talk about it. We need to talk about at least families.
We do.
Yeah.
Yes. But at the national level, we need to begin by encouraging that commitment becomes not just a signature on the paper, but actual change in country.
Yes.
So I tell countries, I believe that your progress should be compared to your own trajectory and not ranked with other countries. Now, we can learn from other countries, but if the trajectory is what we are ranking in a country, then every incremental improvement can be applauded.
Then you can measure it too.
And we can measure it in country rather than just on a global standpoint. That's incredibly encouraging to a country, and you can understand why.
Yeah.
But how do we then move that commitment to actually making those changes? Well, part of it is this unified coalition of pushback against those nefarious pressures. But that is only the beginning. Then there has to be changes inside as well, which is why we created a model to help countries actually make high-impact, low-cost changes. But in the Geneva Consensus Declaration, we wanted to ensure that the context really was, we have to put the priority where it needs to be, and that is women's health needs to be about women's health. And in the title of the Geneva Consensus Declaration, it also talks about the strengthening of families.
Right.
That really is the best environment, both for women and girls to thrive, but also men and boys.
Yes.
When you look at health, it's really the woman who is the health care provider in the family, both the encourager, the person who sees it happen, who does the research. Now, this is not a blanket statement for every single family, but we know the research in any country in the world, it really is the woman. And we know research here in the United States that married men live longer. And why is that?
Yes, that's right.
Part of that reason is because it's the wife who encourages the husband to get the annual checkup or to get a little more exercise in their life or eat more.
To walk backwards.
That's
over 50.
all of those things, right.
Yeah.
Right. And so those are inextricably linked. And so you can understand then why the family is in there.
Yeah.
And incredulously, this was something I also learned during the negotiations at the United Nations. There was a resolution on the girl child, but no mention of family.
Oh, yeah, that's not good, huh?
It's not good. And so
that's singled out again, right? So the individual singled out from the family. Yeah, that's not good.
Right. But when we're talking about a little girl and ensuring that she can grow up to be a healthy in all aspects young woman, no mention of the family
Yeah.
So we proposed including the family, and one country said that is a red line to include the family. And I was absolutely shocked, like, this shouldn't even be controversial, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's so much research. You can put all the research aside and only depend upon common sense, and still there should be no controversy, right? So after the fact, I asked some of our team, can you find out why it is the country said that that was a red line for them?
Yeah.
And you hit it exactly. They said it's because the family compromises the autonomy of the individual.
Yeah. Wow. You know, an individual, I said the other night, I was trying to think about what I was going to say on stage, and I was thinking individual. Where did individual ever come from? And Jordan said, well, that's a liberal term. And I thought, oh, that's a liberal term, because individual separates you from everything. And if you don't have any, like when children are children, students are students, they all have, and they have communities in those designations. But if you just talk about individual, well, is that individual doing anything meaningful with other people? And if they're not, then they're at risk to be swayed in any direction.
Yeah. And the family is the original community.
Yeah, that's right.
And the community with the least agenda to the detriment of the members of that community. Yeah,
because they're there on the ground comparing themselves to who they were yesterday. As Jordan said in one of his books, one of his rules, compare yourself not to other people, but to who you were yesterday. And make those incremental changes. And within a family, you can do that. You can compare your family dynamics at dinner one night and the next and see if it's improved. Mm-hmm. Or when, someone comes in the door, your dad comes in the door, or your mother comes in the door, that first initial meeting, is your meeting today better than it was yesterday, and what made it better? And talking about more like hospitality, which is so important, and that we don't talk about at all as hospitality. But I get
that model is the very model that we were actually telling countries. How are you compared to how are you today compared to how you were? It works at every single level.
Oh, cool. That's very cool. Right. Let's see. Let's find another question, because I have some. Surprisingly.
I also want to talk about Proto, which takes the GCD.
That's the next one.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Proto, to improve a model to help countries improve health and thriving for women and families. Okay, that's what that is. And it's under the Institute for Women's Health. Okay.
Yeah. Yep,
so let's talk about it.
Okay. Well, once we started the Institute for Women's Health, we put a priority on working with those countries that had already agreed to that commitment to improve things in their countries, that were members of the Geneva Consensus Declaration. I was curious, and there was no research to find the answer. What were the vulnerabilities, both to making improvements in country, and what were the vulnerabilities to that external pressure? And so I didn't ask that question in particular, but in talking to political leaders from around the world, whether parliamentarians or members of the executive branch, I found that there were 4 areas where those vulnerabilities rose to the top, and it didn't matter if it was in Latin America or Asia or Europe or Africa. It didn't matter what region of the world. It didn't matter what the cultural dynamics were. It didn't matter the ethnicity. It didn't matter the religion.
So it was beneath
that. It was beneath all of that. And we decided that we needed to create a model that would help address those in a very practical manner. we're a policy organization, so of course it begins with policy, but we know that policy is what undergirds good programs and then good results as a result. We approached the president of Guatemala and asked if he would be willing to partner with our institute to create a prototype of this model. And incredulously, he said yes. And within the hour, we were working with ministers. That's very fast. And people told me things happen very slowly in governments, which I know, having worked in the government, but they happen even less quickly in Latin America or Africa or, that was not our experience at all.
Interesting.
And we centered them around 4 things, and that helped to be predictive of which ministries we worked with which ministers, and then who in the greater population we worked with, who were influencers from the local level all the way up. Number 1, education. And we learned from other countries that one of the avenues that radical ideologies are introduced in countries is through that next generation.
Yeah,
through the educational.
The vulnerable, right?
That's right. Often through things that sound very benign, like sex education, like empowerment, like development, like human rights. None of those things are bad, but those are avenues that are used to get into the schools, have access to young, impressionable minds, and change the course of history for that country, but also change things for that individual. So education was first.
Yeah.
Second was health. We looked for a women's health framework that ministries of health could adopt that were high impact, low cost, that removed silos, where there would be interministerial work together, but then beyond the federal level, that there would be a consistency of effort across every stakeholder, that included in health the definition of optimal health, so we could make all of those things apart, where there wasn't a focus merely on the reproductive years, but the totality of a woman's life from even before she was born. We know that the first 1,000 days, which begins at conception to age 2, are the most critical for the trajectory for the rest of a person's life. But we also know that every stage of life has those unique characteristics that are often not being addressed. I was talking to one minister of health not long ago, and when I was talking about the fact that our women's optimal health framework helps to identify those critical needs and solutions at each stage of a woman's life, I said, let me give you an example. What do we do to assist postmenopausal women? And she said, no one has ever brought that topic up to me, ever. Well, that just shows that there are gaps that should not be gaps, because that is a large and growing percentage of the population, not just here in the United States, but in countries around the world. So we knew that there needed to be a different paradigm. And fortunately, the First Lady of Uganda agreed to launch that for not just Africa, not just for her country, but for the world, in partnership with us earlier this year. So those are the first 2. And it's very easy to see how those can be easily become programmatic implementations. The third is laws, legal. So that's working with Congress, with the judiciary, to ensure that there are no gaps. And then the fifth is diplomacy. And that came really for two reasons. Number one, as we did research and talked to leaders, and when we asked them, let's say you're having a bilateral negotiation with another entity who is offering financial assistance or some other assistance in partnership, but there's an ideological condition that is inconsistent with your values, your laws, maybe even your Constitution. How do you negotiate? And almost without exception, leaders said, we don't negotiate. Taken together, those four pieces seem very disparate. But just like the Geneva Consensus Declaration, these four elements of Proto help a country defend from external, but then help them make very real improvements and fill gaps that are currently in their service provision to improve health for families and women and girls. When we worked on the prototype with Guatemala, I met with the Minister of Education, and I thought for sure that she would want to design together a sex education curriculum. Her response surprised me, but I think it was an excellent response. She said, I want us to work together to create a parent-child communication guide that empowers parents to be that expert on even those controversial issues, even those difficult topics. And the reality was that in her country, there were parents who couldn't read or write. And so they felt that they had nothing they could teach their children.
Right.
It was actually their children who would teach them.
Right.
So she said, we'll make parent schools in all of the different departments across the country. And whether someone can read or not, parents will get together and we will go over the monthly lessons in this parent guide. And there are activities and there are opportunities to begin or strengthen communication in natural ways, around the table, going for a walk, things like that.
Yeah.
But it will help parents realize that they are the most important voice in their child's life. And if they're not speaking, that is still communicating. Well, I had the distinct privilege to be able to go to one of the trainings with the parents. And I saw parents who aren't that demonstrative of affection in public, just as a result of the first lesson, which really focuses on the importance of you as parent and casts a different vision. After that lesson, then there were some activities where the children were then brought in. And these were, I think, second grade children, young. But the parents didn't know they were coming in. They were outside and they were doing an activity as the parents, holding hands, and then they had their hands up at this particular point, and the teachers had told the children, okay, run between the arms and give your parent a hug. And these were men and women, moms and dads. Those parents, there was not a dry eye.
No.
They were holding their children as if it was the last time they were going to be able to hold them, caressing their hair. Now, does that mean that there's going to be a wholesale change in the family as a result? Not necessarily, but that was a start.
That's a start.
And I did not anticipate it. And I saw the wisdom of the Minister of Education, that we can teach things in the schools, but it really needs to start in the home. I believe, and it's not just a belief, there's research to back it up, that a parent that has meaningful conversations with their children, that is the most powerful protective factor in that child's life.
Oh, yeah.
And why are we separating parents from children? And even at adolescent age, the whole paradigm for healthcare and for other adolescent services are to separate parent and child without a thread of evidence that that is a healthy way to pursue. So in Protego, we are bringing children and parents together, both in the clinical setting, in the educational setting, in every setting possible. We're doing that.
You know, you talk about around the table or on a walk. And, you know, when my son was in grade 9, so he'd gone to his first year of high school, we had a dog. And so in the morning I'd go walk the dog. And he had to walk to the bus, so I'd walk the dog when he had to go to the bus. And he would walk about 3 blocks to the bus. And in that time, I would hear what his plans were for the day, what his challenges were, possibly, you know, and say goodbye to him every morning. And it happened in an organic way.
Which is the best way.
Which is the best way, but it happened every day, which is really important. It happens every day. But you can't schedule these times with your kids. You kind of have to be there and have the opportunity arise, and then make that happen more often, so that you can have those conversations that are meaningful. So yeah.
Well, and the Parent-Child Communication Guide has two different parts to it. The first is talking about character qualities that are important at every age to be able to begin to build habits, to know that this is a safe place to come. To talk about what is a healthy friendship and relationship. And you can see these things build, but these are conversations that would seem to be organic around the table, but could be for any age.
Yeah.
The second part is what Guatemala called the sensitive topics. So it began with puberty, and how do you take the drama out of the puberty talk? Yeah. Well, and then what about relationships and dating and preparation for marriage and sex and all of those things? Those topics were much more detailed because we wanted the parent to know more than might be asked at that moment, right. Because these are conversations that are not just a single conversation. They need to be developmentally appropriate, but it also needs to be in those teachable moments where you're walking a few blocks.
Yeah, or you come home and your daughter's there with her boyfriend. Yeah, right.
Right, because we thought if parents are going to be the experts, then we need to give them enough factual information and ideas on how to communicate things so that they feel equipped and empowered.
We talk about negotiation, and when you know that you've negotiated enough is when the spirit of play emerges. So, you know, between parents and children, there might be some tension around a topic, and if you can have this information, knowing the subjects that you can bring up, and know that the conversation will have gotten to a point that is successful when you feel the levity between you and the dance and the play emerges, then you know that you've talked enough. You don't have to take it any further. Everybody can go their merry ways by then until the next conversation. Yeah.
That's really good insight.
That's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like to talk about that. Right. Mm-hmm. Let's see. So you have mentioned in your writing your role as an emissary for the positive distinctives of America.
Oh.
Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah.
Just
let me take
that
a
last
drink
story
first.
made me cry a little bit.
There wasn't a member of our team that wasn't crying,
Yeah.
and there wasn't anyone in Guatemala in the Ministry of Health that wasn't crying.
Yeah.
To see an adult
That's
dad.
how you know how meaningful it is, you know?
Oh, I know. I mean, it nearly brings tears to my eyes every single time because I relive it and I remember this, these very masculine men with tears coming down.
Yes, of course.
Their faces, stroking the hair of their, young son.
Mm-hmm.
That will leave an indelible mark.
Yeah, that's
on
for sure.
both
Yeah.
of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, we've all grown up, and we can remember those moments that we really shared with our parents. If we could make that, if we could optimize that'd be really, really good for a child's sense of peace and strength and courage. It would bring all kinds of really good virtues to them.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it also is, I think, just a really poignant example of how policy can impact the family.
Right. So
and
how
the
important
individuals
it is
in that.
not to have it co-opted in any way.
That's right.
Right. To have pure policy.
That's right.
When it comes to dealing with families.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to identify those who you can partner with who are guileless in that intent.
Yes. Right.
That this is not a political issue. Even though there are always politics involved, you have to identify partnerships with those who really care. So when we work with countries, I say right up front, we are not an organization that brings money to your country.
Right.
We don't require money from your country. We are here to work in authentic partnership to improve the lot of your people. We are not an expert on what those needs are. We can read all the data, but we don't know your people like you do. You are the experts. We don't know what has been tried and failed. We don't know who the influencers are to help that that work to succeed. You know all of that. We can bring the data and research, we can bring our years of experience, we can bring what we've learned from other countries, and that makes the perfect partnership. So it's not a partnership like most, where someone comes to a country and they'll say, we know what your problems are, here's our solution.
Right.
We already have designed what you need, and it just needs to be translated into your language, and you need to implement it. That's a much more efficient way of doing it, but it's not the way to make real change. And not only that, we see our institute as a partner and someone who can give consultative advice. But at the end of the day, it's the country, the people, the influencers who have to take ownership. Otherwise, it's not going to have...
It's their responsibility.
It's their responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to make long-term change.
Yeah.
We're not just interested in that short-term change. And it shouldn't be someone that looks like me. It needs to be someone who looks like them and understands. More recently, I was in another country and was speaking to the Minister of Health about a partnership again. And this is a country that is very impoverished. It has many needs, but I could tell in talking to the Minister of Health that she was the right person for that job. And she wanted what a Minister of Health should want, and she was trying to find ways to make it happen. She asked me some very pointed questions, and those pointed questions were to identify whether or not I was this white woman coming from Washington, D.C., again pushing an agenda. And I answered her pointed questions, and then she said, "Do you know you are the first organization that has ever come to our country to partner on these issues that didn't come with ideological conditions?" Wow. The first country. That is so sad.
But in a way, it's encouraging.
It
maybe
is.
It's the beginning of something new.
It is encouraging. Some of these countries only know the U.S. through cable channels that are piped into their country. The media, whether it's in music or movie, that has the USA stamped all over it. And so if you think about those things, what is the message they're hearing? It is a common narrative across the media, across the arts, and then those one-on-one conversations with far too many of our diplomats. And so they think they know what America is like, and they think they know who all Americans are because they've never heard anything different, which is such a sad commentary. But I'm actually very honored to show them that there are many Americans who break that stereotype. Many people in these countries, even political leaders, have never been introduced to anyone who is different from how they are currently defining America and Americans. I love that part of my job, even though it's not in my job description. I don't think that I could ever just have a job. It was my care and concern for my kids that started this whole process. And looking back, I just see how God prepared me each step of the way. You may not know this. We've just met, but I'm an introvert.
Right, and you have this huge smile on your face. For an introvert, that's surprising.
Really?
Oh, well, one of the cardinal attributes of an extrovert is a smile. Like this.
Oh, so I have done the study.
Maybe you're more extroverted than you think.
No, I'm absolutely not. I gain my energy being by myself and then think about what I do, right?
Yes, always engaged with other people.
But I really believe that when you're in a missional pursuit, which means, on a very grand level, you want to change the world, but that you really care about making a difference. And there's nothing wrong with the job. I just know I couldn't do that.
Right.
That I really have to believe in what I'm doing, and what better way to begin than the love for your own kids. My sister and I are only 2 siblings. I'm the older, she's the younger. We are best friends. We share the same priorities for our lives, the same values. She's just a wonderful person. But in some ways, we're also very different, which is complementary, really. She is probably someone who would rather run from controversy, and I run into it.
Oh, yeah.
Not because I want to.
No. But that's who you are.
That's who I am.
Yeah.
Even though introverted. But
yeah.
I think because I so believe in what we're doing, the authenticity is not manufactured. Not that there can be manufactured authenticity, but sometimes someone can seem very authentic, but it's not genuine.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's no getting around it. And it all sources back to my family and now my grandchildren.
Yes.
And seeing, number one, if at the end of the day my family doesn't know that they're more important than anyone in any other country, then I've failed.
Right, right.
But you also think about, what is the kind of legacy that I want to leave behind?
Yes, absolutely. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and it's always so emotionally stirring to me, and I'm not by nature a very emotional person, to know that there are leaders in other countries who are there because God has placed them there. Many of them are very strong in their faith, and they feel very alone. And what an honor to be able to encourage them and to know that they aren't alone and that they aren't crazy for pursuing the goals for their countries that they're pursuing. I can't think of many things that are more gratifying than that. And there are a lot of opportunities right here in the United States, and I do hope that one day the Institute has the ability to be able to have those same sorts of opportunities here. But for right now, I hope that that leader who told me at the United Nations, I don't know how much longer we can stand, that we hear that fewer and fewer times because they realize they aren't alone. And that we're not just giving encouragement to those leaders, but we're introducing them to things that they can do in their country that either they were unaware of, or they felt were beyond their reach, or they felt that their country was too small, too poor, too unstable. Fill in. It doesn't matter. But now they see that they can make a difference. And now they see that they aren't alone. And now they see that those incremental changes that they can make in their own country may not make a blip on their ranking internationally, but in the families and the lives of their citizens, it makes all the world.
Yeah. So maybe the ranking internationally really isn't that important, you know?
I think it's, yeah.
You know, when you're at home in your house, in your town of 2,000 people, 400 miles from the next city, really what difference does it make how you know, the international ranking? What's important is your family and these 2,000 people and everything that's going on in your town.
And when you see religious leaders from very different religions that in some countries are very antagonistic, but they are not proselytizing one another.
Right.
They are agreeing to work together on those areas where they have similar theological beliefs, and the family is one of those.
Yeah, there's a higher purpose.
Yeah, and it's really beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Yes, and, you know, it's all the different religions. It's well, what we need to do is have a personal relationship in also our community, but a personal relationship as well. I mean, you have to have a personal relationship, or at least strive to have a personal relationship, because it'll make you a more effective person.
Well, my faith animates me.
Me too. You know, when I go out on stage, I ask for courage and strength before I go on stage. You know, I can't do this by myself.
No. And, you know, I think that the recognition that it's God who has that I'll just say that scarlet thread through our lives and puts in place these opportunities, gives us our natural predilections and personality, but takes us outside of our comfort zone, protects us through those, nudges us to continue to get outside of it again and again and again.
So there's Abraham and his story. There's Moses and his story when you thought that maybe you didn't have the voice that you needed to be a leader, but there you had it, with the help of other people, I'm sure.
But it's also a reminder of personal humility.
Yes.
Because it's really God that is orchestrating this, and I just want to be a faithful servant.
Yeah.
And all of these things that we're working on are consistent with the heart of God for his people and for the world,
Yeah. Praise the Lord. I think this is the only way back from all of these ideologies.
It is.
Yeah. It looks that way.
I know. And something beautiful about these interreligious councils, they're called different things in different countries. Not all countries have them. But in Guatemala, they met regularly with the president. And think about the opportunity to have that kind of a communication, right? And to share. And in Guatemala, it was Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jewish, Mormon.
Oh, geez.
And there were a couple.
But Orthodoxy?
Right.
Everything but Orthodoxy, maybe.
I think so. And some others that were smaller, but they all came around. But I'll never forget one time, and this was near the end of COVID, where there were still restrictions on travel, and it was difficult because of supply chain issues to get things into countries. And they had the president for an hour or two, and it was the rabbi who said, we're having a hard time getting kosher foods into Guatemala for our religious celebrations. Could you do something to make that so? And the president, of course, had no idea that was an issue, but he said that he would. And then the Muslim leader said, well, we are having the same problem. And for the ensuing next few minutes, it was the Jewish and Muslim leader who were being a support to one another for a similar purpose, but collegially, that would never have happened were there not that opportunity.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I, for a national celebration in Guatemala, I was sitting right in front of the rabbi, and I said, it's really, this interreligious roundtable is just beautiful, because I think that what I'm seeing here in Guatemala should be replicated in the United States. And he and others who were part of the roundtable acknowledged that you develop friendships. And that takes those conversations to a totally different level. That you're not agreeing on religion, but you are agreeing on the humanity of the person that you're speaking to.
Yes, right.
And that changes everything.
Yeah. Well, even with the, and I only know a very little bit about the American government, but I know that it used to be that everyone would move to Washington, and all their kids from the Democrat Party and the Republican Party would go to school together, and that on the weekends they'd play baseball together and they'd have picnics together, and those kind of things aren't happening as much anymore because they're not moving to Washington, because now both the husband and the wife are both working, and so if one of them gets an appointment to come to Washington, they don't move the whole family. And so it's changed Washington some. And so, we don't know what kind of changes, how they will impact, even at the governmental level. A family change has changed the dynamics at the government level. It's very interesting. It's very, that's why you have to listen and watch and realize that these are, they seem like these things happen and that we don't have any control over it. We have no agency, but if we look at it and see the dynamics that are changing, then maybe we can see how we can rectify
that is really
division.
That is really an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about how families staying in their home states had an impact. Now, some families still do move.
Yeah, some for sure, certainly they do.
But there is definitely a divisiveness that I do not remember.
Right.
And I remember when I was working with another organization that I founded, we would easily talk across the aisle.
Right.
And we would find common interest, commonalities in values.
Yeah.
We didn't agree on everything, but we focused on those areas that we did agree with. But it's increasingly difficult.
Yes.
To do that. And that wasn't that many years ago.
No. So I wonder, and when you move as a couple with your small children to a new community, the way that you find other people in the community is through your children often. The children that play together.
Yep.
Then you meet the families, and then you have community. And it would be the same thing in Washington. That would be the case. And then you would know people who sit on the other side of the cabinet. You'd know them. And then you could listen more easily because you've known them outside, and that gives you some commonality just to listen from and to give them the benefit of the doubt that they might have something to say. Yeah. So having the recognition of the intrinsic value of every human life really does have consequences. It does have consequences. Yeah, that's right.
Interpersonally and beyond.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've had a good conversation.
We have had a good conversation. It's been such a delight. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, my pleasure. I was very excited. I'm glad that it all worked out. And I want to thank the studio for having us and giving us a nice place to sit, and for you to coming in. That was, I just started the day in a perfect way coming here.
Well, welcome to Washington.
Thank you.
I hope you come back many times, and I hope at least a few of those I'll get to see you again.
Yeah. Well, I'll see you tonight.
That's right. But beyond tonight.
Yes, beyond tonight. That's right.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tammy.
Hey, my pleasure.